Leshrac. He was the Grove's chosen instrument of cruel, unblinking intellect, and somehow that made him the most tormented soul in the entire Outlands. Leshrac is an intelligence-based hero, a being of pure electrostatic devastation who declares, "I blast across the land," with the fury of something that has been screaming for a very long time. He was the first entity to emerge when the universe itself first felt pain, born from the first thought that sparked existence into being, and the tormented Grove, the ancient consciousness woven into the very fabric of the Outlands, shaped him as its first agent. The Grove needed someone who could think clearly while acting through the suffering of the world, and Leshrac was that agent from the very beginning. He was supposed to be its conscience and its executioner, a creature of perfect judgment set loose on a world that needed destroying. His presence in any battle is immediately recognizable. Split earth fractures the ground beneath enemy feet, diabolic edict rains explosive pulses across an area that ignore armor entirely, and lightning storms arc between clusters of targets with devastating chain potential. Then there's his ultimate, Pulse Nova, an aura of pulsing energy that radiates outward continuously, incinerating anything that stays close. This is a mage who doesn't cast a spell and step back. He stands in the middle of everything and makes the world itself a weapon. Here's where it gets worse. The Grove is dying. The ancient consciousness at the heart of the Outlands is fading, eaten by something far worse than any enemy army, its own slow, irreversible slide into extinction. And Leshrac has watched it happen. He was present for centuries while the thing he served atrophied from within, losing the will to sustain itself, and everything that depended on it. The defenders would point out that he's still carrying out the Grove's will, that his devastation is still serving a purpose, that his torment is just the mechanism through which the Grove continues to act. But look at what that actually requires. A tormented being doesn't execute a plan with clarity. A tormented being destroys because destroying is the only language left to it. If the Grove's plan required precision and judgment, and it did, for centuries, then Leshrac stopped being its instrument the moment his suffering became the point. Leshrac's story reveals something fundamental about the Outlands cosmology. The system that produced him does not care about its agents. The Grove birthed a being of pure intellect, and then let it suffer the consequences of its own slow death. What this reveals about the larger system is that the Outlands' ancient powers are not benevolent architects. They are natural forces, like weather, like geological pressure, and the beings they produce are not servants. They are symptoms. Leshrac is what happens when a cosmic intelligence goes extinct and doesn't bother to tell its most loyal creation. The tormented soul isn't the exception to the system's rules, he's the most honest thing about it. Grimstroke. At least Leshrac's suffering was accidental, a side effect of serving a dying world. Grimstroke's was the methodology itself. Grimstroke is a ranged intelligence hero from the Ashkaban Peninsula, and he enters any fight wielding a giant mystical paintbrush that doubles as both weapon and scepter. His entire kit is built around ink. He draws a path of dark ink with his attacks that damages and slows anyone it touches, and every ability he commands manipulates that same inky substance to devastating effect. Stroke of Fate fires a single brushstroke that arcs between enemies, dealing damage that stacks with each target it passes through. Phantom's Embrace unleashes a phantom figure, someone he loved, that latches onto enemies, silencing them while draining their life. Inkswell surrounds allies in a protective layer of ink that amplifies their power and stuns anyone who dares to strike them. And Soulbind, his ultimate, links two enemy heroes together so that damage and disable effects flow between them, a cruel and brilliant form of control that turns enemy coordination against itself. The Ashkaban were a people of the Outlands, a community bound to an art form that straddled the boundary between the physical and the spiritual, where ink was not merely a medium for recording history, but a bridge to forces beyond the material world. Grimstroke distinguished himself among them early, his rapport with the brush appearing to be something close to divine, a gift that set him apart even within a culture that venerated the connection between ink and spirit. The Ashkaban saw in him their greatest practitioner, the one who could translate the voices of the in-between into something the living could understand. What they didn't see was what he was willing to do to deepen that connection. The stroke of his brush that would end everything started as an act of devotion. It ended as the extinction of his entire people, who now exist only as inky revenants, bound forever to his brush, summoned and dismissed at his command, their suffering the fuel for his every spell. The strongest case for reading Grimstroke as something other than a villain is that his design is steeped in mythological tradition. His abilities and aesthetic draw from Southeast Asian spiritual practice, the boundary between the living and the dead, the idea that an artist's brush can command forces beyond mortal comprehension. Within that framework, a spirit-wielding ink mage who commands phantom allies and binds the souls of enemies together is not a perversion. It's the fulfillment of an ancient archetype. The Ashkaban Peninsula's culture, built around calligraphy and deep spiritual communion, makes the idea of someone ascending to godlike power through their art feel earned rather than arbitrary. There's a coherence here that rewards the viewer who looks deeper. The brush isn't just a weapon, it's the artifact of an entire civilization's relationship with the unseen world. But here's the thing, none of that mythological texture explains the most important fact about Grimstroke, which is that every ounce of his power comes from the annihilation of his own people. The inkswell doesn't protect allies by drawing on ambient spiritual energy, it draws on the Ashkaban. Stroke of Fate doesn't fire ink from some external source, it's ink that was once them. The phantoms that Phantoms Embrace summons are Ashkaban souls, and the figure described as a former lover is just the most prominent among them. The aesthetic is real, but it's a costume. Underneath it, the story is about someone who sacrificed an entire race to become powerful, and whose continued existence requires their ongoing torment. The mythological dressing gives it beauty, it doesn't give it a moral. What Grimstroke proves about mages as a category is the specific corruption that comes when power demands not just suffering but consumption. Where Leshrac suffered as a byproduct of forces beyond his control, Grimstroke chose his price and paid it in the only currency that mattered to him: other lives. That's the category's darkest secret, and it's the through line that connects every practitioner on this list. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which arcane practitioner you think was the most devastating. Let's get back into it. Shadow Demon. Where Grimstroke wielded ink and tragedy to bind individual souls to his will, Shadow Demon doesn't bother with such delicate instrumentation. He simply consumes the essence of everything that crosses his path, and the Shadow Realm is his domain. The shift from Grimstroke's precise, personal horror to Shadow Demon's wholesale consumption is the difference between a torturer and a natural disaster. Shadow Demon is listed among heroes the Dota 2 community considers essentially godlike, and that classification carries real weight. He is a primordial entity, older than most recorded history, who rules over the Shadow Realm, a dimension of negation layered over the mortal plane, present but unseen, until it tightens around something that strays too far across the boundary. He doesn't conquer territories. He doesn't forge alliances or launch crusades. He waits at the threshold between light and dark, and when something steps too far into his domain, he unspools it. His method is consumption, plain and simple. He doesn't kill you, he takes what you are and leaves behind a husk that the Shadow Realm can absorb. His ability kit reads like a menu of extraction methods. Disruption banishes a target into the void between moments, not a stun, but a brief removal from existence across all planes simultaneously. Shadow Poison stains the essence, compounding with every exposure until even a hero built for durability finds their substance eroding from within. Demonic Purge strips away every enchantment, every blessing, every divine protection until the target is just a mortal creature standing before something that doesn't need magic to destroy it. These aren't offensive spells in the conventional sense, they're harvesting tools. Shadow Demon's reputation for preying on those who seek forbidden power is attested across the ages. He is drawn to practitioners who reach too far into shadow, and his shadow poison doesn't just accumulate, it compounds. 1 exposure is survivable, 2 is painful. Each subsequent exposure multiplies the damage, eventually eroding even the most durable substance. That's a digestive system designed around slow, inevitable breakdown, and it works on anything with a soul to stain. Shadow Demon doesn't need to be stronger than you. He just needs to wait until his poison has done the math. The lore doesn't hedge on what he is, a primordial force of negation whose realm is the absence of light itself, whose disruption removes beings from existence across every plane for critical windows, and whose corruption, explicitly described in his lore, can reach even the most resilient souls. The game mechanics are the story, translated into gameplay. When the tooltip says disruption banishes from existence, the lore means it. And the mechanism underneath all of it is hunger, not ambition. Shadow Demon doesn't have a grudge against mortals. He doesn't want to punish the world or rule it or redeem it. He simply consumes, because consumption is what the Shadow Realm does, and he is its lord. Every power he wields, banishment, stacking corruption, purge, maps directly onto a method of extraction. He is, at the deepest level, a cosmic force of consumption given form and intelligence, and the lore surrounding him makes that description feel generous rather than reductive. Enigma. If Shadow Demon's threat had edges, targets he could reach, souls he could stain, a domain he had to wait within, Enigma's threat has no such constraints. Shadow Demon affected one thing at a time. Enigma affects everything around him simultaneously, and he does it with a silence so complete that even the physics meant to protect you forget how to function. Enigma is the most deliberately mysterious figure in the entire Dota 2 roster, and the mystery is structural, not accidental. Where other heroes have origin stories, Enigma has origin stories, plural, contradictory, told by different peoples across different eras who can't agree on what they're describing. Nothing is known of Enigma's background, and the contradictory legends told across different eras remain unresolved. Different traditions offer conflicting accounts of what Enigma is, and none are confirmed. Neither legend is confirmed, both are credited. That deliberate ambiguity is the point. What the lore confirms without hedging is what Enigma does. He moves through space as a beast between planes, phasing through solid matter like smoke through a crack, sometimes corporeal, sometimes entirely ethereal, appearing and disappearing at the boundaries of perception. His presence warps gravity around him, not metaphorically but literally. Eidolons, the small replicating horrors that split from him during combat, are described as fragments of Enigma himself, shards of a cosmic consciousness capable of multiplying and merging back together. And then there's Black Hole, the ability that made Enigma a legendary name before most players had read a word of his biography. Black Hole collapses space into a vortex at Enigma's chosen point, pulling everything within range inward and holding it there, disabled and stripped of agency, while pure void damage eats at everything the vortex touches. The lore describes this not as a spell Enigma casts, but as a manifestation of the force he channels, and it confirms that he can create black holes from nothing, treating that as a feature, not a metaphor. The detail that changes everything is this. Eidolons are fragments of Enigma himself. Not copies, not summoned constructs, not familiars or manifestations. Fragments. Every Eidolon that splits off during combat is literally a piece of his own consciousness put into a physical form. And when Eidolons merge back together, they're not combining independent units. They're Enigma reintegrating himself, becoming a single, larger, more potent expression of the same void. A mortal mage can summon creatures, a cosmic force that can split itself into independent physical shards and recombine at will is operating on a completely different category of being. The Eidolons don't represent Enigma's power. They are Enigma's power, distributed across space and then gathered back in. A specialist in Dota's cosmological framework would push back here, and fairly. Enigma's legends are contradictory by design. The Eidolon as fragment reading depends on how literally you take an ability tooltip, and treating gameplay mechanics as cosmological statements is a reading that can get out of hand fast. But the lore page doesn't hedge. It doesn't say Eidolons resemble fragments or are akin to fragments. It describes them as fragments, plain and direct, and the black hole described in the same text explicitly warps gravity and disables every entity caught in its radius. Dota's lore team treats ability descriptions as narrative signals, not flavor text. When the tooltip says fragment, it means fragment. When it says the vortex disables everything, it means everything. The mechanics aren't decoration, they're the story, written in gameplay. And the question this all leaves open is the one the lore deliberately never answers. What is Enigma really? Not which origin story is true. That's the surface version of the question, and the lore's answer is designed to keep it permanently unresolved. The deeper question is whether Enigma is a being who was transformed into a cosmic force, or whether Enigma is the cosmic force, and the alchemist legend is just the latest shape it decided to wear. The Eidolons strongly suggest the latter. A transformed mortal wouldn't produce fragments of himself that are independently void-capable, that can merge and split and exist as discrete entities while remaining pieces of a single consciousness. A cosmic force that briefly took a shape, though, that splits exactly the way Enigma's Eidolons split. The lore never resolves this. Every time the question surfaces, the answer is another legend, another contradiction, another version of a story that might have happened once, or might be happening still. And that might be exactly how Enigma wants it. A being between planes doesn't owe mortals a biography, it owes them gravity. Storm Spirit. If Enigma is one being stretched across dimensions, you might at least understand the logic of it, But Raijin Thunderkeg, the entity the world knows as Storm Spirit, embodies something far wilder and less rational. He is wind and weather given self-awareness, a jovial and irrepressible force of nature contained in human form, and that containment is something he seems to find endlessly amusing. His lore portrays him as an elemental spirit who predates the current conflict between the ancients, a being whose origin traces to the island of Zeus, where the people first bound his essence into a physical vessel so they could live alongside him. He didn't arrive as a conqueror or a prophet. He was a force that showed up, took an interest, and decided to stay. The war between the Radiant and Dire gave him something he hadn't had before: an audience. He joined the battle not out of loyalty to any cause or allegiance to any ancient power, but because the spectacle of gods fighting over mortal ground struck him as the finest entertainment available. He fought alongside the Sentinel forces, unleashing ball lightning across the battlefield with devastating speed, arcing between enemies and leaving arcs of electricity in his wake. But make no mistake, he was there for the show. Storm Spirit's abilities are expressions of pure elemental freedom. Overload releases a burst of static electricity whenever he moves with enough intensity, shocking anyone nearby. Electric Vortex pulls an enemy toward him with a crackle of lightning. Ball lightning transforms his body into a bolt of pure energy that travels across the landscape at impossible speeds, striking everything in its path before reforming at the destination. And Static Remnant leaves behind a stationary electrical clone that detonates when an enemy approaches. Every one of these abilities reflects the same underlying truth. This is a being who cannot be contained by walls, by distance, or by the usual constraints of a battlefield. He moves where he wants, when he wants, and what he destroys along the way is incidental to the journey. What makes Storm Spirit genuinely unsettling beneath the jovial exterior is the scale of what he is. He doesn't reference any merging ritual, doesn't carry the weight of a dynasty, doesn't serve any ancient pact. He simply is wind and lightning and the raw kinetic energy of a storm given consciousness and personality. The Osterian Empire fell to different hands entirely. Storm Spirit's domain is the sky itself, and his power over it is absolute. He manipulates electricity and storms with a mastery that makes most formal sorcery look like a child waving a stick. He traverses space with ball lightning, appearing and disappearing at the speed of thought, and the devastation he leaves behind isn't calculated. It's just what happens when a force of nature decides to show up to the party. He is revered among the peoples of the Outlands as an extraordinary entity, not worshipped, not bargained with, but acknowledged with the same wary respect you'd give a hurricane. You don't command a storm, you wait for it to pass, and you rebuild what it touched. Storm Spirit operates on that same logic, vast, impersonal, and entirely unconcerned with whether anyone survives his passage. The joviality is real, but it's the joviality of something that has never once had reason to fear anything in existence. He plays with mortals the way a child plays with toys, enthusiastically, without malice, and with absolutely no regard for what survives the game. Io. If the previous entry embodied wild elemental freedom, Io represents something far older and more foundational, the quiet, patient spark from which all life ultimately springs. Io is one of the four fundamentals, the ancient elemental forces that predate the ancients, that predate the war, that predate almost everything the world now takes for granted. Where Storm Spirit is a spirit of motion and chaos, Io is a spirit of connection and life, and that distinction makes them far more significant than their classification as a strength hero suggests. Io's lore paints them as an entity of incomprehensible antiquity, a being whose existence stretches back to the earliest moments of creation itself. Among the four fundamentals, Io represents the spark of life, the primordial energy that first animated the world and continues to pulse through every living thing. They are not a god in the conventional sense. They are something more primal, a force that existed before gods existed, that will continue existing after gods have faded, that binds the universe together at its most fundamental level through a connection so basic most beings never even perceive it. Their abilities reflect this nature perfectly. Tether links Io to an allied hero, creating an invisible bond that transfers life and mana, heals over time, and grants movement speed. Because Io doesn't protect allies by raising barriers or casting wards, Io connects to them, directly and physically, channeling the same spark that runs through everything alive. Overcharge lets Io burn through its own essence to boost the damage and speed of any tethered ally, because Io's power is not finite the way mortal magic is. It comes from the same source that powers all life, and sacrificing a fragment of that source for a friend is simply what the connection is for. And then there's Relocate, an ability that lets Io open a rift in reality itself and carry an ally across the map in an instant, because an entity that predates space doesn't really respect distance. Io moves through the seams of the world the way water moves through cracks in stone. The intelligence classification is the game's system trying to categorize something that predates categories. Io isn't smart in the way Invoker is smart, accumulating knowledge and refining spellcraft across eons. Io is knowledge, the instinctual, ancient understanding of how life connects to itself. Strength is a closer fit because it reflects raw, unbounded force, but even that undersells it. Io doesn't push or pull or smash. Io binds. Io tethers. Io is the reason anything in the universe can affect anything else at all. Every spell cast, every sword swung, every life lived, is only possible because the fundamental connections Io represents are intact. When Io chooses to relocate a hero across the battlefield, they aren't teleporting. They're reminding the world that distance was always an illusion, and the connection between two living things is more real than the space between them. What Io ultimately proves about this category is that the most powerful forces don't announce themselves. They don't stand on mountaintops declaring supremacy. They don't gather armies or forge weapons or perform rituals of induction. They simply exist, quietly and perpetually, weaving the fabric of the world together at the seams, and whether anyone notices or not, they keep everything from simply falling apart. Storm Spirit is the storm, Enigma is the void, Io is the thread that holds both of them, and everything else, in place. Puck Io has spent eons tethering itself to the edges of reality, a cosmic spirit whose existence predates the gods and whose sole purpose is to bind the universe's seams together. But that kind of patient, foundational power is almost boring in its consistency. What you really want is something that takes that same scale of cosmic antiquity and weaponizes it as pure mischief. That's where we land now. A fairy dragon with origins predating the current conflict, embodying magical mischief and possessing a perspective that renders mortal concerns trivial. Puck is a fairy dragon, a magical creature set apart by its alien perspective and trickster nature. Puck isn't just long-lived. The character operates on a timescale that renders mortal concerns genuinely absurd. Puck approaches the world as an ongoing show, finding amusement in the epic struggle between the ancients and the heroes. All of that accumulated perspective has left Puck with a particular relationship to the conflict. They don't see it as a clash of meaningful ideals or a struggle that demands commitment. They see it as a performance, an elaborate, ongoing play that Puck finds genuinely entertaining. This matters enormously for what Puck actually does on the field of battle, because their abilities aren't just tools, they're extensions of that cosmic jester philosophy. The illusory orb lets Puck send a shimmering sphere of magic arcing across the battlefield, dealing damage to everything it touches, and then snap back to its location with a blink of precision that recalls Blink Dagger. Waning Rift erupts in a burst of arcane energy that damages enemies and silences them in an area. Because what fun is a war if nobody can cast their big dramatic spells? Dream Coil tethers enemies together, leashing them to a point and stunning them if they try to flee. Phase Shift lets Puck slip briefly into a different phase of existence, becoming untargetable as it banters with cosmic forces most heroes never even perceive. And before anyone writes this off as mere whimsy, as if a creature that old, that powerful, couldn't possibly take anything seriously, consider what you're actually describing. An entity that predates the gods, that has seen every possible outcome of every conflict in history, that exists partially outside the normal flow of time and consequence, and that chooses to spend its eternal existence meddling in mortal wars for its own amusement. That isn't cute, that's terrifying. It means there is no appeal to cosmic justice, no higher authority you can petition, no moral framework this being is obligated to follow. Puck operates outside mortal morality entirely because it has outlasted every mortal moral system ever invented. What sealed the deal, the moment that proved this wasn't just flavor text, was the Elder Titan's own recognition of what Puck represents. When the Elder Titan set out to repair the damage Zet had inflicted on reality, the vast cosmic work of restoring the world's fractured architecture, he found the fairy dragon already there, watching the entire repair effort unfold with the same detached amusement a person might watch a particularly entertaining house cat rearrange furniture. It doesn't matter that you're trying to fix the fundamental architecture of existence. To Puck, it's all a show. The Elder Titan, a being who shaped the world itself, simply acknowledges Puck's existence as a given and moves on. Not because Puck is harmless, but because engaging with something that ancient and that indifferent to the stakes is a fight no elder god can win. Arc Warden. If Puck's brand of ancient magic is chaotic and unpredictable, Zed is the opposite, and that's precisely what makes him the most alarming entity on this list. Where Puck treats the Ancients' war as entertainment, Zed didn't just watch it. He ended it by force, and he's been sitting on the result ever since, waiting to see who dares challenge a god who already reshaped reality to his liking. Zed is a fragment of the primordial consciousness, the original cosmic mind that existed before the universe was divided into opposing forces. When that consciousness sundered itself into the radiant and dire ancients, Zed was the piece that refused to participate. He didn't choose a side. He didn't join the war. He simply watched as his own fractured siblings tore reality apart across millennia of conflict, and when he grew tired of the spectacle, he decided to render the choice meaningless. He overwhelmed both ancients and bound them together within the Mad Moon, forcing a unity they never would have accepted willingly. A physical representation of what reality looks like when a being tired enough of a fight simply decides to end it, even if the fighters themselves aren't ready to stop. That is what Zed actually did. He didn't create the Mad Moon, the Ancients' War did that. But he seized it, bound both warring cosmic principles into its crystalline form, and made himself its warden. The Ancients continue their struggle within that bound space, and their conflict continues to radiate outward, shaping the world through the power that bleeds from the moon's surface. But they fight at Zet's sufferance, contained within a sphere of his making, their eternal war reduced to a contained process rather than an existential threat to reality itself. And here's the thing about a god who can end a war between cosmic forces by sitting on them. The Elder Titan, who existed before the world and carries scars from its creation, has been trying to repair the damage the Ancients inflicted on reality, and that repair work necessarily includes undoing what Zed did. The Ancients continue their struggle, influencing the world through their conflict. Puck finds the whole thing amusing. But Zed just stands at the center of the sphere he built, holding two warring cosmic principles in a state of enforced proximity, watching the mortals scramble across the surface of a world that technically belongs to something he compressed into an object the size of a planet. Occasionally, Zed sends a Tempest Double to the battlefield, mirroring his own form. The Tempest Double that Arc Warden summons in battle isn't just a gameplay mechanic, it's the story. Zed can split himself. He can send an aspect of his consciousness down to the mortal plane to act independently while he observes from beyond. Spark Wraiths manifest as volatile spirals of energy that home in on enemies and detonate, while Magnetic Field generates a zone where enemy attacks miss and friendly attacks find unnatural precision. These aren't spells in the conventional sense. They're what a primordial fragment does with surplus attention when the main event is happening elsewhere. Arc Warden's abilities demonstrate control over energy and space that belongs to a being who understands reality as a system he designed, not a system he inherited. Zed's power isn't a collection of tools, it's the sum total of everything that existed before existence itself, focused through a single will that decided the best use of that power was to force two warring cosmic principles into a very tightly controlled ball and then see what happened next. The reason Arc Warden plays the way he does in the game, self-contained, farm-heavy, designed to control tempo and dictate when fights happen, maps directly to this lore. This is a hero built for players who want to feel what it's like to be the one who decided the rules of engagement before anyone else arrived. The spark of the primordial wasn't designed for team fights, it was designed for a god who doesn't need a team, Rubick. But the next name on this list earned one of the highest magical offices on pure talent and ferocity alone, a distinction that doesn't care how ancient your origins are, only how ruthless you are with what you take from other people. Rubick didn't ascend to the rank of Grand Magus through cosmic inheritance or divine mandate. Rubick is the youngest ever to be inducted into the Order of Magi, a prodigy whose arcane aptitude became apparent almost before he could speak. He mastered arcane combat by facing down rival mages who challenged his growing power, and by the time he was old enough to understand what power actually cost, he was already far beyond anyone who might have taught him caution. What he discovered in the course of that early education was a rare gift for arcane adaptation. Not merely competent, not just dangerous, but exceptional enough for the ranks of the Magus, a title reserved for the most exceptional arcane practitioners in the known world. The insubstantial 11 don't hand out that rank lightly, and Rubick walked into his induction ritual, a magic maelstrom designed to push arcane practitioners to their breaking point, with full knowledge of what was at stake. Every spell flying through that ritual was potential ammunition, and Rubick used the chaos as cover, while the mages destroyed each other, absorbing and redirecting their own magic back at them with lethal precision. He absorbed their spells, adapted them, refined them, and turned them against their casters with a speed that left the entire assembly reeling. The previous Grand Magus, his own father, met his end in that maelstrom, and Rubick took the title in the same breath. What makes this chilling isn't that Rubick survived the maelstrom, it's that he weaponized the entire induction process as his audition. Nobody investigated, nobody suspected. The insubstantial 11 witnessed a display of arcane cunning so devastating that the only appropriate response was to hand him the title immediately, and they did. Character motivation didn't matter when Rubick was absorbing, adapting, and redirecting their own magic back at them with lethal precision. He earned the title through sheer arcane ferocity, stolen, refined, and mastered beyond anything a single school of magic could ever produce on its own. His magic is theft, pure and unapologetic. He doesn't generate arcane force from some deep reservoir within himself. He absorbs another mage's spell mid-cast, adapts it, refines it, and then uses it better than the original owner ever could. It's a philosophy that defines every move he makes. The Grand Magus title belongs to someone who takes what already exists and makes it theirs. Rubick killed his way to the top with other people's magic and then got the job for it. Invoker. If Rubick earned his title through calculated violence within a confined maelstrom, Karl the Invoker didn't need to earn anything at all. He simply outlasted the universe long enough to become its most formidable spellcaster by default. Where Rubick affects the mages around him, Invoker operates on a scale that touches everything: time, space, and the fundamental building blocks of magic itself. Karl the Invoker has held the unofficial crown of most powerful intelligence hero for as long as anyone can remember, and the longevity backing it defies ordinary understanding. The Dota 2 lore describes him as quasi-immortal, his life sustained entirely by his own concentration. He's intimately aware of the mechanism and its fragility. Who dares threaten my concentration? Isn't a throwaway taunt from some generic arrogant sorcerer. It's a being whose entire existence is one sustained act of will, speaking from a deeply personal understanding of what could end him in an instant. Death is but a lapse in my concentration, is the mechanic of his immortality, stated plainly in first person. He knows exactly what keeps him alive and exactly how catastrophic a single distraction could be. His power works. He can weave two elements together and produce something that shouldn't exist. Ice that burns, lightning that freezes, all because nobody else has had the time to push fundamental components that far. He doesn't just cast spells, he engineers new ones from pieces that shouldn't logically combine, and he does it seemingly without effort because he's had lifetimes to drill the basics while other mages are still learning their first incantation. The magic circle is just the interface. What's actually happening is a being who has had as much time as he wants to master his craft, stacking refinements upon refinements until his spellcasting has evolved into something that doesn't resemble anything a normal mage could ever produce. His presence in Dota 2 lore stretches across some of its most pivotal cosmological moments. Before the war between the ancients that shaped the world of Dota, before most of the forces now locked in the endless struggle between Radiant and Dire even knew what they were fighting for, Karl was already there, a figure whose magic predates the conflict that defines the entire setting. His fortress of ice stands as a monument to a time when mages shaped the world rather than merely surviving within it. The ancient artifacts collected across eons, the knowledge buried in his spellbooks, the breadth of elemental combinations committed to memory, each represents a milestone that took centuries to reach, stacked one atop another, until the whole structure becomes incomprehensible to any mind that hasn't been around as long. Other ancient beings like Undying and Puck are still younger than him, and the gap isn't close. He's not the most powerful intelligence hero because of some innate gift or cosmic artifact. He's the most powerful because he's had the longest to get there, and he never wasted a single day. Every impossible combination, every spell that shouldn't work but does, every refinement that pushes the boundaries of what magic even is, it all traces back to a mind that has been continuously, obsessively, devastatingly focused on mastery for longer than most civilizations have existed. That's a terrifying kind of power, not flashy, not immediate, but absolute in its inevitability. Ancient Apparition. He goes by Calder, and Calder is the cold. Not the cold of a winter night or an ice spell, the cold of a universe that has spent itself. The temperature at absolute zero after every star has spent its last photon, and every last wisp of heat has leached away into nothing. That is what Kaldur is. Kaldur is a faint and eerie projection of a being that exists outside of time, an image cast from the cold, infinite void that predates the universe and awaits its end. Kaldur is, Kaldur was, Kaldur shall be, and what we perceive, powerful as it appears to us, is but the faintest faded echo of the true, eternal Kaldur. Some believe that as the cosmos ages and approaches its final moments, the brightness and power of Kaldur will also intensify, that the Ancient Apparition will grow younger and stronger as eternity's end draws nigh. His grip of ice will bring all matter to a stop. His image will cast a light too terrible to behold, an apparition no longer. And yet the hero select screen classifies him as intelligence. That classification sits right alongside Invoker, who calls himself the mightiest sorcerer alive, who summons and reshapes the elements at a whim, who studied for decades to become a one-man catalog of magical disciplines. Invoker is a master of spells. Kaldur is a force that predates and will outlast every spell that has ever been cast or ever will be. He doesn't need intelligence because he studies magic. He has intelligence because that is the only category the classification system has for something that exists entirely outside of time, and is, by any honest measure, among the most formidable beings on the Dota 2 roster. Here's where a reasonable person pushes back. Come on, they'll say. He's just a blue guy with a frost attack. You're reading way too much into the flavor text. And fair enough. The hero's mechanical kit in the game doesn't exactly scream cosmic terminus, a cold blast, an ice path, a chilling aura, a global blast that slows and damages. But the lore doesn't lie about what he is. The bio, the voice lines, the details layered across multiple hero updates converge on a single unsettling picture. Kaldur's appearance in the material plane is a mercy, or possibly a warning. What he actually is, the personification of the universe's final, irreversible slide into silence, is something that no hero bio has ever described so plainly or so bleakly. He isn't a mage who commands ice. He is the end of all heat, all motion, all time. And there's a reason the game treats him the way it does. Every intelligence hero in Dota 2 is at some level about knowledge and manipulation, pulling levers, shaping outcomes, winning through cleverness. Kaldur breaks that frame entirely. He isn't trying to win anything. He simply is. He doesn't manipulate entropy, he embodies it. The intelligence tag is the game's way of placing a cosmic constant into a system built for wizards and scholars, and the result is that Kaldur reads, in practice, as a hero who cannot be outplayed in the way other intelligence mages can. You can outthink Invoker. You cannot outweight the heat death of the universe. The design places a being that is, by definition, the most powerful intelligence class entity that can exist, and then gives him a kit that doesn't advertise that fact, which, if you're watching the game for the story underneath the mechanics, is exactly the kind of quiet narrative detail that makes this lore worth paying attention to. He's just not a hero, not really. He's what comes after. Aghanim. If Kaldur is the end of everything, Aghanim is the man who decided that wasn't good enough and went looking for ways to make something new. Not by creating from nothing, Kaldur gets that power, but by studying, by traveling, by getting himself so thoroughly lost across the astral dimensions that the search for better magic became his entire existence. He studied dark, forbidden sorcery, the kind that doesn't appear on any spell tree, and that most practitioners wouldn't touch with someone else's wand. His quest to forge a grand scepter, something that could channel power beyond anything anyone had ever wielded, cost him the ability to find his way back. And what he brought back from those lost dimensions is why the title Aghanim the Mighty, Apex Mage, all of it, is not vanity but fact. He didn't stop at one forbidden dimension. He kept going. He traveled across alternate reality after alternate reality, exploring corridors of existence that most beings don't know exist and wouldn't survive a single step into. He sought out the deadliest creatures from the darkest dimensions, not to fight them, not to destroy them, but to bring them back and set them loose as tests. He laid out gauntlets of escalating horror across multiple planes of reality, and then positioned himself as the one being who could navigate every single one of them. That's the Apex Mage in practice. Not the wizard with the longest spell list, but the wizard who has walked through dimensions that erase the minds of anyone who enters them and come back with enough power to share. The generosity part is the most dangerous. Aghanim calls himself humble, his legend calls him generous, And generosity from an apex-level practitioner of forbidden magic is not what it sounds like. He didn't just make a powerful item and leave it lying around. He brought creatures from his labyrinth across the dimensions with him. The Aghanim scepter he left behind continues to reshape the abilities of those who find it, and anyone who receives a scepter is receiving a fragment of the Apex Mage's own obsessive, dimension-spanning brilliance. He didn't leave a manual. He left a gauntlet, a reward, and a piece of himself inside both. What warriors do with that power, what any hero does when their spells change shape and scope because of something Aghanim designed, is the real consequence of his work. He isn't just a powerful mage on the roster, he's the architect of the roster's most transformative mechanic, and he became lost in the dimensions he traversed. Aghanim the Generous gets confused with Invoker, and the confusion is understandable. Both are intelligence heroes, both are associated with the most powerful magical artifacts in the setting, both carry titles that suggest supreme mastery. But the line is clean. Invoker's power is innate. He was born with a genius for the elements, studied it, refined it, mastered 10 spells, and called himself the mightiest sorcerer alive based on that mastery. Aghanim's power is architectural. He built it by walking into places that erase existence, brought something back from each one, and then built a system that distributes fragments of that power to whoever is strong enough to earn them. One studied to become powerful. The other became powerful by studying dimensions that shouldn't exist, and then turned that power into something that could be handed out. Aghanim isn't the strongest mage because he can cast the biggest spell. He's the strongest mage because he built an entire dimension-spanning reward engine and seeded it with pieces of his own power, and every hero running around with an augmented ability is walking proof that he is, precisely, the Apex Mage. Warlock. The institution that produced the realm's most trusted battle mages, the ones who hold the line at Stonehall, who raise the frost barriers that hold back abyssal hordes, was quietly teaching the dark arts that everyone else considered too dangerous to touch. Which means the boundary between sanctioned sorcery and the forbidden was never a wall. It was a suggestion, and Warlock walked right through it with a diploma. Warlock holds an intelligence classification among the roster of Dota 2 heroes, placing him among the realm's most potent arcane practitioners, but his specific brand of power sets him apart even from his peers. At Ultimere Academy, where the standard curriculum spans protective wards, elemental manipulation, and the controlled application of force magic, Warlock's obsession was demonology, the study of entities from the Netherrealm, the mechanics of binding them to service, and the rituals that allow a caster to negotiate pacts with intelligences that predate the world's current order. He didn't need to sneak into restricted sections or crawl through forbidden archives. The Academy was teaching it as part of his program. He studied it openly, as a student, with the institution's full knowledge and approval, and when his coursework was done, he left with credentials that certified him as a fully qualified master of the dark arts. Think of what a typical Ultimere graduate looks like. They channel power through wands and staves and focused incantation, drawing from the ambient magic of the world to conjure barriers of force, hurl bolts of lightning, or call down frost. Their magic is a tool, something they direct, control, and deploy on command. Warlock departs from that model at every level. His spells don't draw from the ambient magic flowing through the world. They pull from somewhere else entirely. The entity he calls forth in his most devastating ability doesn't materialize from raw energy or arrive from a nearby plane of existence. It comes through a ritual compact, a negotiated exchange between Warlock and a demonic intelligence, where something is offered in return for something far more destructive than any fireball or force barrier. His classmates learn to wield magic. Warlock learned to maintain a relationship with something that has its own agenda, its own will, and its own reasons for wanting into this world. The usual story casts Warlock as a rogue student, someone whose ambition pushed beyond what Ultimere permitted, who went off-book and deeper into dark territory than the Academy ever intended. That framing assumes the institution drew a hard line Warlock chose to cross. But the lore makes that reading impossible. Warlock studied demonology as an enrolled student at Ultimere with the Academy's full knowledge and approval, completed his program, earned his credentials, and left with institutional backing for a discipline that by every public account should have gotten him expelled or worse. Nobody investigated the curriculum, nobody questioned it. The academy that trains the realm's most trusted defenders had been quietly producing demonologists for who knows how long, and no one outside those halls seemed to notice or care until Warlock actually used what he'd been taught. What nobody has answered is what happens to every other student who sat in those same seminars and then went out into the world. Warlock is the one who chose to invoke what he learned, but he couldn't have been the only student exposed to that material. The curriculum existed. The texts existed. The rituals existed, accessible to anyone who passed the right courses and chose to actually practice them. The question hanging over Ultimere Academy, unasked and unresolved, is how many graduates are quietly holding pacts with nether entities right now, capable of doing exactly what Warlock did, choosing not to. The institution's complicity is the real story. Warlock just made the mistake of doing what he was taught. Warlock was the kind of sorcerer Ultimere was built to produce, a scholar who went further than his peers, but still recognizably within the same category. Oracle. Nerif, the figure the world knows as the Oracle, is not a mage in any conventional sense. The title points toward a diviner, someone who peers through the veil of time and reports what they see, but that framing collapses the moment you understand what he actually does. He doesn't witness the future. He speaks it into existence, and the consequences of those words ripple outward across every layer of reality simultaneously, rewriting what is and what was with the weight of absolute certainty behind them. His origin traces to the Hidden Temple, a place so deeply removed from the world's ordinary geography that most scholars dismiss it as allegory. From that isolation emerged a creature of prophetic foresight whose very existence bends causality, not through ritual circles or incantations or negotiated pacts with nether entities, but through the simple, devastating act of seeing something and saying it. The moment he utters a vision, that vision becomes real. It isn't divination, it's authorship, applied directly to the structure of reality itself. The evidence is specific. Oracle was responsible for an event that altered Phantom Assassin's destiny across infinite realities, not one timeline, not one possible world, but every version of her story that could exist. The mechanism involved a prophecy so potent it created paradoxes, shattered timelines, and literally spawned new realities where his words had never been spoken. The result of that prophetic intervention condemned Phantom Assassin to face a cycle of never-ending assassination, a fate she cannot evade, cannot outrun, and cannot die from, because Oracle's declaration made it the permanent architecture of her existence. Consider what this means for his power relative to conventional force. Oracle possesses little to zero brute strength. He doesn't channel elemental fury, doesn't raise barriers of force, doesn't summon allies from other planes. His abilities, Fortune's End, Fate's Edict, Purifying Flames, False Promise, operate entirely on the manipulation of probability and consequence. He stands at the nexus of possibility and decrees which thread becomes real, and the world rearranges itself around his declaration with no option to refuse. The usual framing casts Oracle as a mystical advisor, a cleric-type figure whose prophecies offer guidance to those who seek it. That reading requires accepting that prophecies are merely observations of a future that already exists, that Oracle sees what would have happened and reports it faithfully. But his intervention with Phantom Assassin proves that condition is false. If his words were merely describing a pre-existing future, they couldn't have altered anything. The fact that speaking a single vision can reach across infinite realities and rewrite a soul's entire existential condition means Oracle isn't reading the future at all. He's authoring it, and the world's rules are optional when he decides otherwise. This reveals something unsettling about the system these figures operate within. The Dota 2 universe runs on rules that are fundamentally negotiable. Reality isn't a fixed structure that power breaks against. It's a suggestion that certain voices can override entirely. The gap between Warlock's dark pacts and Oracle's prophetic declarations isn't one of degree, it's one of category. Warlock needed an institution, a curriculum, and a demon's permission to reshape the world. Oracle just needed to open his mouth and decide what the world would become. Skywrath Mage. What Oracle achieves with prophecy, shaping reality through foresight, Dragonus achieves through sheer, unconstrained arcane force, except his power is hollowed out by a loyalty split so brutal it makes prophetic vision look like a mercy. Dragonus is the Skywrath Mage, the most powerful arcane practitioner of the Ghastly Eerie, and what he cannot do is choose between the woman he loves and the crown he has sworn to serve, because the woman he loves is Shendalzar, the Skywrath scion whose throne was seized by her own sister, while Dragonus was bound by oath to stand aside. The Ghastly Eerie runs on ancient, merciless protocols. Its court mages don't advise, they enforce. Dragonus sits at the apex of that arcane apparatus, and his spellwork has kept the Eyrie intact through rebellions that would have leveled lesser citadels. But all that power, every ounce of it, is bound to the institution that betrayed Shendalzar. Shendalzar is still alive somewhere in those towers, still the rightful ruler, still the woman he loves. His is a troubled existence by necessity, not by accident. The ghastly Eyrie engineered it that way, because a mage divided against his own loyalty is a mage who will never turn his full power against the throne. What this looks like from the outside is a courtier of devastating arcane capability, loyal to a regime, occasionally conflicted. What it actually is a man whose love has been weaponized by the very hierarchy that gave him his power. The Eyrie didn't just bind Dragonus to its service, it bound him to a choice where both options destroy something he cannot live without. Restore Shendalzar, and the Eyrie's political order, his entire world, his identity, his station, collapses in the revolution that would follow. Keep serving the Dragon Scryer, and Shendalzar remains cast down forever, and with her, the part of Dragonus that ever believed loyalty was worth more than love. The ghastly Eyrie doesn't need chains for its most powerful mage. It needs him to care about two things that cannot both survive. Shadow Shaman. Where Skywrath Mage was trapped by love for a queen he could not save, Rasta is something far more unsettling, a mage who chose his own path, and chose cruelty, from the moment choice became available to him. Born in the Bleeding Hills, Rasta was just a starving youngling when picked up by a traveling conman, and the way the Bleeding Hills bury everything that doesn't die fighting meant that whatever this child was, he was forged in hardship before he understood what hardship meant. Magicians like Rasta were blamed for diseases and poor harvests in those hills, persecuted and executed for powers the locals neither understood nor tolerated, and that environment made him into someone who understood that conjuring wasn't performance art, it was survival. The con man was right about one thing: Rasta could conjure. His innate talent for channeling arcane energy into visible, violent form was prodigious, and the Bleeding Hills had already forged him into a vessel that nothing could break. But it was the road that made him. As they moved from town to town, his reputation for conjuring grew, not slowly, not quietly, but with each performance sharper than the last. The serpent wards became deadlier, the curses landed more reliably, the crowds paid more coin, and more coin meant more freedom, and more freedom meant Rasta stopped performing the act and started becoming it. The trade name Shadow Shaman, which the con man had slapped on him for the road, began to outgrow the man who'd first worn it. Rasta dedicates his powers now to destroying anyone who would seek to do him harm, not as a performance, not as a routine, but as the settled purpose of his existence. The serpent wards he summons don't wait for threats. They find them, they hunt, and the reason they're so effective, the reason a hill troll from the Bleeding Hills can stand alongside mages from the ghastly Eyrie and the Northern Realms, is that Shadow Shaman is pure conjuring. No scholarly tradition, no ancient tomes, no lineage of masters to teach him. Just a child who learned that the right spectacle could be more dangerous than any blade, and who spent a lifetime sharpening that spectacle into something indistinguishable from the real thing. Mass serpent wards erupt from the ground to ravage enemy structures. Shackles snare opponents in place, Hex turns foes into helpless creatures, Ether Shock arcs between enemies with precision damage, every ability is a trick refined into a weapon, and every weapon is a trick that stopped pretending to be a trick a long time ago. Where Visage commands the administrative authority of the afterlife, where Grimstroke commands the collective suffering of an entire people, Rasta commands nothing but his own raw talent and the kind of relentless self-invention that comes from having been discarded by the world before anyone bothered to teach you its rules. He didn't inherit power. He took it, performance by performance, curse by curse, until the performance became a force that no one in the Bleeding Hills or anywhere else could ignore. Visage. Where Shadow Shaman's entire career is built on pretending the shadows answer his call, Visage is the real thing, the genuine article of death magic, and Visage stalks its prey without mercy or end, willingly destroying all which may give shelter to the fugitive essence. He is grouped in the intelligence attribute tree with other powerful magic users such as Bane, Zeus, and Invoker, but that classification misses the fundamental point. Visage is essentially not of this world at all. He is not a practitioner of magic in the way the others are. He is the system that magic plugs into. Visage is the guardian of the narrow maze, the spectral corridor through which souls must pass when they depart the mortal plane. He has no free will in the conventional sense. He serves as an extension of the afterlife's own imperatives, bound to pursue fugitive essences that attempt to flee the natural order. Razor polices that same maze as the warden within it, a more active enforcer of its rules, while Visage oversees the whole operation, keeping souls in place within its corridors, preventing otherworldly beings from crossing the line back into the living world, acting as the medium between realms. He is the filter, the wall, the reason the dead stay dead. Visage is a guardian entity whose purpose is absolute and non-negotiable. Visage is not a passive guardian. When he mobilizes, he brings the full spectral authority of the afterlife with him, the stone familiars that flank him and lay waste to anything they touch, the necromantic energy that corrodes enemy magic at its source, the soul-blasting force that drains the will of enemy casters and leaves them hollowed out. He is functionally the afterlife made tactical. He does not just command death magic. He commands the administrative structure of death itself, and when he arrives on a battlefield, he brings an eviction notice. The obvious question anyone raises is whether this is just a necromancer, a guy who raises skeletons and commands ghosts. It is, in the same way a nuclear submarine is just a boat. The mechanism is similar, the scale of authority is not. What Visage ultimately proves about this entire category is that power in Dota 2's magic system is not measured in blast radius or mana cost. It is measured in jurisdiction. Every other mage on this list draws power from something external, a patron deity, a cosmic alignment, a bloodline, a lifetime of disciplined study. Visage draws power from the fact that the afterlife has jurisdiction over every living thing, and he speaks for it. He does not cast spells, he issues rulings. Zeus. If Visage gets a pass for existing outside the power structure entirely, and he does because the afterlife has no boss, Zeus simply never needed a pass. He is the one the power structure answers to. Zeus is the god of thunder, king of Olympus, the youngest son of Kronk who killed his own father to seize the throne and now rules the pantheon of the Outlands with a hand that never trembles. He is not banished, he is not depowered, he is not mortal. He is, quite simply, one of the most formidable intelligence-based spellcasters in the entire Dota 2 roster, and he knows it with a confidence that no amount of battlefield humility could convincingly fake. Zeus commands thunder and lightning across the battlefield with a scope that makes most other intelligence heroes look like apprentices. Lightning bolt arcs from the heavens to strike a single target with devastating precision. Arc lightning chains between clusters of enemies with branching electricity that finds every exposed circuit in a grouped formation. Static field pulses damage to every enemy in proximity with every spell he casts, turning Zeus himself into a walking zone of electrical hazard. And his ultimate, Thunder God's Wrath, strikes every enemy hero on the map simultaneously with a bolt from the sky. A display of divine reach that doesn't care about walls, distance, or the usual constraints that limit mortal spellcasters. He is the sky made violent, and he doesn't need to be close to hurt you. The preference he shows for his divine nature over mortal beings comes through in every line he speaks and every lightning bolt he hurls. Zeus is not conflicted about his station. He accepted the throne of Olympus by force, he holds it through power, and he approaches every battlefield with the certainty of a being who has never once been threatened by anything that breathes. The frustration that lingers beneath some of his lines isn't the desperation of a fallen god, it's the impatience of an entity accustomed to instant obedience, forced to work through intermediaries and allies who move and speak at speeds he finds tedious. Every lightning strike carries the weight of divine authority, applied with the restraint of someone who could level a mountain but is choosing to hit a hero instead. Zeus is still classified in the intelligence attribute tree alongside the most cerebral and devastating spellcasters Dota 2 has to offer. He is grouped among the most powerful intelligence mages, and the classification holds. Zeus doesn't cast spells through scholarly discipline or elemental study the way Invoker does. He simply is thunder, a primordial force wrapped in divine authority, channeled through a god who never needed to learn how to be dangerous. He just was, and on a battlefield where most intelligence heroes earn their power through decades of accumulated craft, Zeus shows up with something far older and far less reasonable than scholarship. The raw, unrefined authority of a living god who happens to also be your father's murderer. Witch Doctor. Where Zeus is a god who never needed to learn how to be dangerous, Witch Doctor is something far stranger. A mortal who accumulated so much knowledge across so many lifetimes that he has effectively become a being that was never born at all. His name is Zarvako. He is a wiry, mismade figure from the island highlands of Prefectura, and the magic he commands is not divine inheritance or cosmic alignment or bloodline talent. It is voodoo, ancient, patient, painstakingly accumulated. He mastered fetish magic, devastating hexes, and the channeling of destructive and restorative energies over the course of several lifetimes, meaning every spell he casts carries the weight of centuries of practice compressed into a single gesture. He is the guy who spent multiple human lifespans getting good at one thing, and that one thing is dismantling you from the inside out while healing his friends in the same breath. His skill set is the kind that makes other mages genuinely nervous. Where Zeus paints the battlefield with raw elemental lightning, Witch Doctor works in subtler and more unsettling registers. A maledict that severs an enemy's life force with escalating damage over time, a voodoo restoration that pulses healing energy to every ally simultaneously, a death ward that unleashes devastating bouncing energy against his enemies, and a paralyzing hex that transforms foes into helpless creatures on command. The risk Witch Doctor poses is not just death. It is having your own mind and body turned against you by a man who has had centuries to learn every weakness you have. He dwelled in the island highlands of Prefectura, a place that sounds remote and far from any front line. But his power follows him wherever he goes and affects everyone around him regardless of distance. Allies under Witch Doctor's care find their wounds healing, their strength returning, their enemies falling to curses that should not be possible. He represents affliction and mercy at once, not as a duality he struggles with, but as a single operating principle. Witch Doctor treats pain as a system he understands completely, and he is fluent in every dialect of it. The boring explanation for a figure like this is straightforward. He spent several lifetimes mastering his craft through discipline and repetition, accumulating arcane knowledge the way other people accumulate wealth. That his power is simply what happens when a talented person puts in the work across an unusually long period. That explanation is not wrong exactly. It is just incomplete. It does not account for the way his magic interacts with the fabric of reality itself. The way voodoo restoration pulses outward to every ally within range as if distance is a suggestion rather than a law. The way his paralyzing hex transforms enemies on command. The way a death ward can bounce between multiple targets with targeting precision that suggests something more than centuries of aim practice. You do not accumulate that kind of authority over cause and effect by studying. You earn it by becoming the kind of creature that reality itself listens to. And Witch Doctor, quietly and without fanfare, is exactly that kind of creature. The human strangeness of it is this. Witch Doctor is a wiry, mismade figure who looks like he should be the one needing healing, who looks frankly like he has been cursed more times than he has cast them. He spent lifetimes accumulating the knowledge that lets him dismantle or restore anything he touches, and he has chosen to stand at the front of every battle, cackling, throwing hexes and healing spells in equal measure, acting as the medic and the curse breaker rolled into one. He could have been anything with that kind of accumulated power. He chose to be the person who shows up where it hurts most and simply refuses to let it stay that way.